Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Valerie Jarrett, Tina Chen, the President's Council on Women and Girls, I want to thank you all for being here. It matters more than maybe you even believe. Like many of you, this has literally been, not figuratively, the cause of my life, because whether we're talking about the denial of educational benefits for women and opportunities here or around the world, whether it's the notion that participation in political leadership is out of the reach of my daughters and granddaughters, whether the notion that economic empowerment is not something that every woman is entitled to just as every man, whether it's access to capital, or whether it is physical violence. We have a worldwide problem. It's not just a problem in the United States. It comes down to a simple proposition in my view. I've thought about this since I got engaged in this in 1970. It's ultimately about the abuse of power. It's all about power. It really is. Even the sexual assault is about the abuse of power. Ultimately, we have to give women and girls a greater voice. But that's not enough. They have to be assured that their voices will be heard. My daughters, I've lost one, but my daughter, my 4 granddaughters, I believe my sister who's here today will be introducing a panel. I have been raised to believe what is true. There's not a single solitary thing, not a single solitary thing that a man can do that a woman cannot do as well. By the way, I mean not a single thing. That's not hyperbole. I mean it in a literal sense. I mean in a literal sense. Every single solitary thing a man can do, a woman can do as well. You know, you can always tell the women, I can't see it, so these lights are so bright, I don't know I know there's a hell of a lot of you out there, but I can't see your faces. But what I can say is, you women, you professional women who are out there who work with men, you can immediately tell, can't you, whether that man genuinely respects women. You don't have to wonder. By the way, you know it. You know it immediately. And in almost every case where you find that the man you're working with truly respects you, take a look. It's probable he has a strong mother. It's probable he had a sister. It's probable he surrounded himself and was surrounded from the time he was a kid with women who were strong. The reason I bother to mention that is, this isn't just about freeing women. If we free women with the same opportunity, we free men, we free humanity. We make it all better. We really do. That is not hyperbole. That is a fact. That is a fact. You know that Chinese expression, women hold up half the sky. Women hold up half the sky. And as I speak around the world about abuse in the countries in which I'm visiting, I point out that it's such a god-awful waste. No country from this point on will be able to develop economically fully to their potential until they change their culture. What I'm going to talk about today is what my father called the cardinal sin of all sins. And I mean this sincerely. Everyone asks why I feel so passionate about this. Why did I write the Violence Against Women Act? Why have I done AB? It's a simple proposition. Thank God it's not because my mother or my wife was abused. because of my father. My father's a graceful man whose indignation relating to the abuse of power was palpable. Who said the cardinal sin of all sins is for a man to raise his hand to a woman or child. That is the ultimate physical abuse of power. But an awful lot of you, I think, I can't see you, are part of the millennial generation. This is factual. You are the most progressive, tolerant, engaged generation in American history. And you have a simple, the reason why I'm so optimistic that we will ultimately succeed is you have a straightforward objective, I would respectfully suggest. It's not merely about changing the law and making it better. It's about changing our culture, literally changing our culture. And that is not easy, but we're beginning to make progress. You already heard from Megan, a brave survivor of sexual assault. Back when I wrote the Violence Against Women Act, I said that I believe that women who are abused will suffer from long-term physical ailments, that they'll suffer from post-traumatic stress. And there was no evidence at that time of that. And I got criticized on the right, the same people who said Biden's shelters for women were indoctrination centers, that Biden should not be engaged in writing this legislation because it's a family matter. Well, these same people at the time talked about Biden, there he goes again, engaging in hyperbole. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Center for Disease Control has established without question that women who are physically abused, girls are physically abused, they live with the scars of that, including effects on their immune system for the rest of their lives. They are raped again and again and again and again by the system, by the feeling of voicelessness. So Megan, I've told you before, we've been friends for a while. Thank you for making this your mission, to improve the lives of other survivors, to begin to end this scourge, so that every survivor knows the single most important thing, that it's not her fault, period. You know, when I wrote the legislation, as some of you remember, it was not very popular, even among women's groups. I initially got no support because there was a concern that it would take our eye off of issues relating to choice or issues relating to gender equality or whatever. And so I concluded, and I had a brilliant staff of women on the Judiciary Committee, led by a woman named Cynthia Hogan, the one who went to the NFL to try to straighten them out, if you remember. We concluded that the way we could make progress for the first time in a consequential way was to rip the mask off of this dirty little secret that we had an epidemic in America of violence against women. Because it's the one thing everyone wants to turn their eye away from, to put blinders on. I don't want to get involved. I know he bangs her around, but you know, it's not my place. I know. So what I did, I was able to find some really brave and articulate women who had been brutalized, who were willing to come for the first time and stand before cameras in the Judiciary Committee hearing room that received an enormous amount of attention and tell their story. And I remember the first young woman who had the courage to come. She had subsequently graduated from college, and she was dealing with setting up survivor networks and other college campuses. And this is back when we were debating the law 23 years ago. And she sat before me and the whole committee and the whole world. And she told the story of how she went to a small college just north of Pittsburgh. And she was a freshman. And they had orientation week, and she went through the orientation. And the end of orientation week, there was a pep rally, a bonfire. They didn't have a football team, but they had a soccer team. And everybody went to the bonfire for the game the next day in this pep rally. And she said it got chilly, and nightfall occurred, and she was going to walk back to her dorm. And a young man who was a boyfriend of a neighbor of hers, or a young woman she'd gone to school with in her hometown, who was an upperclassman, said, "I'll walk you back." She said, "Oh, thank you." On the way back, he said, "Can I stop in my room and get my coat?" So she walked in the dorm with her, he dragged her in the room, and he raped her. And I'll never forget what she said. She said, "I ran out of the room, down the mall of the college to my dorm. I was on the 4th floor. I ran up the stairs, went in my room and stripped all my clothes off and jumped into the shower." And then here's the phrase she used. She said, "I took a scalding shower." She then said, "I went back to my room. I was sitting in the end of my bed with a towel wrapped around me. And my resident advisor came in and said, 'What happened to you?' And she said, 'I told her.' And she looked at me and she said, 'You've been raped.' And I said, 'No, I wasn't. I knew him.' No, I wasn't. I knew him." I had my staff go back and look at the laws in every single solitary state on the books relating to assault and violence against women. And the discrepancy in the laws were enormous. My own state of Delaware, a fairly progressive state, there was a law on the books until 1994 that said if a man jumped out from an alley and dragged you in the alley and brutally raped you, he could be charged with first-degree rape. But if you went out on a date with him and you knew him and he did the same exact thing, he could only be charged with second-degree rape. Built into the system, our system, from our English common law, is a notion. If you knew him, you must have somehow been partially responsible. Those of you who are lawyers may remember the notion in law school about contributory negligence. The same notion existed in our law. When I found that, I went home. I promised you I got it changed in 4 days. But, it didn't change the underlying culture. You all know what the phrase rule of thumb means? Rule of thumb, when someone says, well, the rule of thumb is such and such. Back in the late 1300s in England, women who were considered chattels, not fundamentally unlike the horse or the cow or the child or whatever, too many women were being killed by being chastised by their husbands. So the Court of English Common Law, because it's not statutory law that was handed down to us, it was common law, the development of it, was that a man could no longer chastise his wife with a rod bigger than the circumference of his thumb. That notion, to a much less degree, still survives in a significant number of countries around the world, and subliminally in an awful lot of what we do and how we view violence against women and girls. So Megan, thank you for all you're doing, because it's critical to free the voices of thousands of survivors across the country. But most importantly, let them know their voices are being heard. That's where you all come in, that we are listening. It's important. Every psychological and psychiatric study has shown two things women need the most when they're abused is, one, to know that they are believed. To know that they are believed. And two, the best way to do that is identify their attacker. But that's another issue that we can talk about later. But folks, it's important they know they're not alone. As a consequence of some of the horrendous abuses that have come to light, and I think the reason they've come to light is because of all the work you've been doing, we've been doing over the last 20 years. It's now appropriate. It is acceptable. It is expected that when abuse occurs in a visible way, the public will respond, whether it's a football player dragging his wife out of an elevator by the hair, or a celebrated in the worst sense, rape that becomes known to everybody in the country. There's been an outpouring over social media of thousands of other survivors because some have spoken up to share their stories of abuse and survival. We had the White House picnic yesterday. I didn't get a chance to tell this to Valerie, where the president brings in all the appointees in the administration on the South Lawn and thanks them, and there's a little picnic. The president and I walk along, it's called a rope line, and we shake hands with, there were I don't know how many people there, thousands. I'm walking along the line. By the time I got from one end of the line to the other, 7 young women, 7, grabbed my hand and pulled me close and said, "Mr. Vice President, thank you. I've been raped. I didn't think anybody'd listen." 7 yesterday. Since I wrote the Violence Against Women Act well over 20 years ago, there's not a city or a town I go into that someone doesn't privately come up to me, a woman. For the first 10 years, older women saying, "I wish we had had this when I was there." The reason I tell you this story, it's not about me. It's about women getting to the point where they feel somebody might listen to them. I recently saw on Facebook young woman's story. She wrote movingly about how her long struggle to put aside the shame and guilt she felt over the sexual assault. Here's what she said. She said, "I remember scouring the annals of my own misdoings over the years, trying to decide what in my past made me deserve this. Something must exist somewhere in my history to explain why someone decided that my body and my humanity was less than his." She went on to say, "It's been over 10 years since I was assaulted, and I've been blessed to have built a wonderful support network around me. But the memory of this violation is something that while I've healed, I will never forget." lot of you, in the sound of my voice, have probably been assaulted and never told anyone. Over the years, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of testimonials from survivors, each different and specific, but also painful in their similarity. So many speak of being isolated, of not being believed, of believing that she was to blame. Yes, I was drunk. Yes, I did have on a short skirt. Yes, I did. Was it my fault? That's why one of the most important things we did in the Violence Against Women Act was to articulate the basic moral principle that every single woman has a fundamental right to live her life free of violence. I remember when we did the act, when we were debating it, I said if a woman in this audience got up, stripped down, stark naked, and walked over to the United States Capitol, she has a right to be arrested for indecent exposure. But no man, even in that circumstance, has a right to touch her. No man has a right to touch her. Period. 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 This abuse is not a personal matter. It's not a family issue. It's not a misunderstanding of something she had coming. Violence against women is a crime, pure and simple, deserving of our nation's legal and moral disapprobation. So we created the legal tools to help us build a better future with the money from the Violence Against Women Act. Women and men all across the nation have come up with countless ideas. I've met some in the photo line. Some make such common sense, some are creative. All have helped make a difference. To prosecute cases better, to put abusers behind bars, to get police on her side instead of just walking around the block, to get help for what she needs. I came out of my church that I go to just after writing the Violence Against Women Act. And a woman whose younger sister, whose older sister I had dated when I was in high school, came up to me. She said, Joe, I'm not going to use the name. It was Sunday. After 9 o'clock mass, she said, Joe, my daughter was raped. This is 1996, probably. And I said, oh, God, Liz, I'm so sorry. She told the story about how she was a student at the University of Delaware. She lived in a garden apartment just off the campus with a sliding doors, you know. Guy broke in, raped her. They couldn't get in touch with her. Mom sent the brother over Saturday morning. She was in the corner, stark naked, shivering. Called the local police. Police officer came, and the first question he asked was, did you have an orgasm? Look, folks, we've made a lot of changes. Things are getting better. My home state of Delaware, when a victim finds the courage to take action against her abuser, the police are there to escort her to and from the courthouse so she can't be menaced. My son, who's Attorney General, who just passed away, would train his prosecutors to make sure that when questioning the accuser, the prosecutor interposed his body between the accuser and the defendant so he couldn't stare at her and intimidate her. We no longer put the victim and the defendant in the same holding room before they go into court. In Madison County, Indiana, advocates have teamed up with a locally owned chain of gas stations so the survivors fleeing abuse can find safe haven 24 hours a day. In Native American communities all across this country, tribal nations can now prosecute non-Indian offenders for domestic violence, dating violence, and violation of protection orders. There are literally hundreds of examples I could list how the Violence Against Women Act has saved women's lives in every state. This progress is real, it's important. Today, it's no longer, there are actually changes. Today, it's no longer socially acceptable for a man to grab his, quote, wife at a dinner party and pull her. It's no longer appropriate to do things that 15, 20 years ago would just people would have turned the other way. But it still doesn't mean it doesn't still happen. Changing the law is only the beginning. We have to change the national culture, a culture that condones, too often promotes violence against women. You and I have been saying this for decades now. We have to take off the social blinders that make it so easy for people to overlook violence rather than confront it. We have to throw the mindset that excuses its sexual assault by saying, boys will be boys, it's just the way it is. We have to ensure that survivors' right to justice is always paramount above everything else, including the perpetrator or the school's reputation. It's a problem. We still see the news all the time, and frankly, it infuriates me as it must you. We need to change attitude and behaviors at every level, especially young young people. You know, one of the things, the president's been a great, great friend. And when I came on, he asked that I had any special requests. And I had one request. I said, I'd like to bring the Violence Against Women office inside the vice president's office so that I could appoint the people who this is something that I've felt so strongly about. And the president allowed that to happen. And because of two great attorneys general, they've cooperated in that effort. And so what I do is I had some really bright women mostly, but some men as well, who honcho this for me every day. And a couple years ago, I asked Cynthia Hogan to go over to the Bureau of Justice Statistics and see what kind of progress we were making. And there's a lot of progress. 67% violence is down among women and so on and so forth, all this, the numbers. But one thing came just jumping out at us. And it was the most discouraging thing that's happened to me in my entire career. For girls between the ages of 14 and young women to 24, the rate of violence has not decreased a single bit. Not at all. In the past 20 years, the incidence of sexual assault on college campuses have not gone down at all. It's shameful. And the top thing I hear from students, well, what I did was, when I found this out, we did viral town meetings, and we had hundreds of high schools and colleges on the line, and I spoke about this, and I asked them, I said, please send the following, and we gave a web address, the following website, the things you think we should be doing. And I thought what I would get would be, well, we need more police on college campuses, we need better lighting in certain areas and parking lots, we got a little bit of that. But you know what the top thing I heard back from students in high school and college was? To deal with this pernicious challenge? It was get men involved. Get men involved. And that was the genesis of the President's initiative of It's On Us. I've now spoken to a significant number of colleges and universities from the Northwest to the Southeast, all across the country. When I show up on campuses, and some of you may have been there, it generates somewhere between 1,500 and 4,000 students. And I ask them all to take the pledge to intervene when they see something. I speak directly to the young men and point out it's their responsibility. Alcohol abuse on campuses certainly makes the problem worse, but the answer isn't to shame women for drinking. We have to educate everyone about the importance of respect and mutual and affirmative consent. And consent isn't, well, I didn't hear no. Sex without consent is rape. It is full stop rape. And if you cannot consent, because you are unconscious. It is rape. It is rape, period. So everyone, from the president of universities to the deans to faculties to coaches to students themselves, everyone has a responsibility to begin to change the culture on campuses, and I'm convinced we can. There is no excuse when a higher institution of learning fails to protect a precious child that we entrust to them because they worry about their reputation. But we all know the problem goes beyond college campuses. By the way, the Department of Education is investing well over 100 universities right now to determine whether or not they're doing what they have a responsibility to do to protect their students. And if they find they did not, they will be denied federal funding. But if there's guys in the office, you guys in the audience, we've got to overcome this social discomfort of calling out the misogyny that happens when no women are present. The locker room talk, the bar banter, the rape jokes. As a man, maybe it makes you uncomfortable, but if you let it pass because you want to become one of the guys, you become an accomplice. In colleges, in high schools, in workplaces, on the street. And this sexist talk perpetuates the idea that women are somehow fundamentally less deserving of basic human dignity than men. It preserves the social norms that are damaging and wrong. Men often don't call out their peers because they are worried men will judge them as not being manly enough. Now, those of you who think this isn't going to happen, let me remind you, look how rapidly, notwithstanding the god-awful tragedy of the LGBT community in Orlando, look at what's happened. 10 years ago, if you went to a business lunch with 4 men and a waiter walked up with a lisp and asked what you would like, and one of your colleagues responded mockingly with a lisp, "Well, let me tell you what I'd like," no one would have said anything. Today, if that occurs, the mocker becomes the pariah. Because now, because the LGBT community freed more straight men and women than they did LGBT, now you turn and say, what in the hell's the matter with you? We've got to get to the same place when men talk in disparaging ways or take disparaging action relative to women. You know, there's been studies on this. The likelihood is that most of the other men in the room feel the same way you do when you hear these remarks. We overestimate other men's tolerance for violence, their fear of disapproval, so we say nothing. You think you're the lone dissenting voice, but you're actually the majority. Researchers call this the spiral of silence. Just as I talked about, victims' voices have to be heard. Those of us who find this action reprehensible, the talk reprehensible, you have to be heard. You are the ones that are going to impact on changing the culture. As Martin Luther King reminded us, the actions of bad people are not our only problem. We also answer the appalling silence and indifference of the good people. Folks, when we change the social norm through changes in the law, changes in attitude, changes in social expectations, we empower men and women to take actions they might not have taken otherwise. We transform bystanders into advocates. That's what I mean by changing the culture. That's why I'm going to continue to travel long after this job is over to college campuses all across America. It's on us taking the pledge to promise to intervene when they see something, to create an environment where sexual assault is unacceptable. As I point out to these young men on campuses, As a fraternity party, you see a co-ed that is absolutely stone drunk. You see one of your brothers walking her upstairs. If you don't have the courage to walk up and say, "Hey, Jack, not in my house," you are an accomplice. You are an accomplice. Now, as you'll observe, I'll get roundly criticized for this speech, as I always do, and I welcome it. I hope all of you, if you haven't done so, will take 5 minutes to go online today and take the pledge yourself. Because all other progress we've made, closing the pay gap, institutionalizing paid family leave, expanding opportunity in the corporate world, none of it matters if women cannot be free of violence. And it's doubly important because our actions reverberate around the world in countries where women are still treated as chattels, where brutalities like honor killing, forced and early marriage, female genital mutilation are common occurrences. It's important to remember not only how far we've come in America, the Violence Against Women Act, but how much further we have to go. There is never, let me say this again, never, never, never a cultural justification for dehumanizing another human being. Never, 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 never. So don't buy into, well, we have a different cultural norm. It is wrong under any circumstances to abuse anyone and to condone the abuse of women. When a country keeps half their population, half their brain power on the sidelines, it holds back their entire societies. That's why we prioritize the rights of women in our engagement with other countries. Our administration developed the first global strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. We're releasing a new version of that study today. I wrote the International Violence Against Women Act, came within 4 votes of getting it passed, still haven't been able to get our friends on the other team to vote for it. It should be a consideration how we deal with other countries, just like other things those countries do that we take into consideration. We've helped countries from Georgia to Guinea tackle issues, always keeping in mind that women aren't just the victims of violence, they are powerful partners for change. We want to make sure women and girls everywhere can participate fully in their communities, in politics and workforce. The baseline for that is leading lives free from violence. And we need to keep pushing forward. We need to ensure that America remains the world's leader in the march to end violence against women. This has been the fight of my life, and it will continue as long after this administration wins. We're winning. Freudian slip. Long after this administration is gone. And so today, I'm asking each and every one of you to keep this effort alive. An overwhelming sense of urgency to win this fight, to change our social norms. And they can change quickly. Because I may be an optimist, but I believe the vast majority of the American people, women and men, agree with us. Everyone has a role to play. This is a community-wide mission. I know that there's a limited window of time where a woman who has experienced an assault will come forward. And the greatest likelihood that she will reach out is that she will reach out to a friend or family rather than go to the courts. So when someone comes to you, you have a responsibility to believe her, to comfort her, but also be an active participant in her journey of recovery, to make sure she gets a warm handoff to counselors and professional support. Today, you're going to hear from representatives from all across civil society. You hear from people like my friend, and she's my friend, Mariska Hargitay, who have made it their mission to end the rape kit backlog in this country, which is another issue. When I wrote that law, I thought thought, well, this is going to solve the problem. And then I realized there's millions of rape kits still sitting on shelves, not tested. You'll hear from advocates who ensure the survivors of sexual assault are treated with dignity and respect throughout the entire process. You'll hear from law enforcement and healthcare and child protection professionals committed to seeing every offender brought to justice. These folks, everybody in the court is in a coordinated community responding and embracing the notion that we can end this. We're not going to end violence, but we can end the attitude that somehow violence against women is of a different nature. We can work together to build an agenda that we can carry forward in the years and decades to come. And since the Violence Against Women Act is up next for authorization in 2018, now is the time to ignite the conversation. Because every time it has to be approved, it's a fight. It's hard to believe. That's the only thing that makes me despair. We came close last time to not getting it reauthorized because we increased protections in Indian nations and some other things. I'm serious. But think about this. After its demonstrable positive effect, folks on the other side were refusing to let it pass. So look, folks, we got to hold our institutions accountable. I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for the support that you're giving to women all across the board. On behalf of my granddaughters, I want to thank you, and I mean that. That's not hyperbole. I mean that literally. Because ultimately, change happens one person at a time. The mother who is trapped in hell and doesn't see a way out. The girl who doesn't know that it's not normal for her boyfriend to hit her. The college students who thinks it's easier just to say nothing and ride it out. We can help her. We can break her out of isolation. We can validate her story and give her justice. We can make sure she knows that it's not her fault. And we know that we've been successful. I'm always asked by the press, and I'll end this and get out of here. I get too wrapped up in this. I'm always asked by the press, okay, Mr. Vice President, how will you know when you succeeded? And I know what that answer is. We will have succeeded when not a single woman who is violated ever asks herself the question, what did I do? What did I do? And we will succeed it when not one man who raises a hand or takes a violent action against a woman is able to say with any credibility in his own mind, well, she deserved it. That's the change of the culture that has to take place. You can get that done. We need you badly. Thank you very, 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 very much.